Hello our viewers and followers. Welcome to Ethiopia Today. The federal government's truce declared in March failed as the third round of war broke out on August 23rd. It's so unfortunate to see such glimmer of hope faded away so fast. But who started the latest round of Ethiopian war? According to the prominent experts and observers, the failure of truce was the most inevitable outcome though. The information about how and why the war restarted is confusing and misleading as no party is ready to take the blame once again. We thought clearing the blur about the renewed war of Ethiopia's northern regions helps. This presentation is devoted for this purpose. We will be highlighting the secret document which states the TPLF's next strategy and its ultimate goal too. We will be also briefly touching on the US Special Envoy's trip to Ethiopia. We invite you to stay tuned, and please also like and share the video and support the channel so that we reach out to more audience as much we can. First-time visitors, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Then you won't miss out the exciting and very important videos we bring to you. Let's get into the presentation. Who started the war? Why did the experts and observers predict the inevitable failure of truce? It seems that they have carefully examined the outcome of the past such initiatives and the inherent interests of both sides. We will be giving you some highlight on earlier negotiation endeavors later on. But let's focus first on how and why the recent peace initiative failed. What was going on behind the scenes in the build-up of the third round of the Northern War? Firstly, let's look from the federal government's perspective. After declaring a unilateral humanitarian truce in March, the government of Abiy has undertaken significant confidence-building measures. The federal government lifted the state of emergency, halted the advance of federal troops to Mekelle, released detainees suspected of being affiliated with the TPLF. Overall, the government expressed its readiness to engage itself in peace talks without precondition, at any venue and at any time. Furthermore, the three-member main committee including the Deputy Prime Minister Demarca Mokenon was established to speed up the peace process. The imperative of alleviating the suffering of citizens in the conflict-affected parts of the Tigray, Afar and Amhara regional states have been given high priority. Ensuring a sustained provision of humanitarian aid and facilitating the resumption of basic services is also the top agenda from the government side. The Abiy government eyes on closing the war chapter as soon as possible and laying the foundation for future political dialogue. Let's turn now to the other side. What was happening around TPLF's site before the launch of the third round of war? TPLF seemed to be welcoming the federal government's unilateral humanitarian truce declaration. But the group put forward some highly sensitive preconditions for the peace talks. Furthermore, Debretsion Gebremichael, leader of the rebels' made war campaign in Tigrinya, translated as, "Tigray will only be for those who are armed and fighting. Those who are capable of fighting but do not want to fight will not have a place in Tigray." Such developments obviously were indicating what would be following. The TPLF seemed to be hungry for more bloodshed in the nation. They were beating another war drum instead of engaging themselves for the peace talks. On August 23, 2022, before the start of the recent round of war, a letter signed by Gebremichael being shared with the Associated Press said Tigray leaders had conducted 2 rounds of confidential face-to-face talks with federal government's senior military and civilian officials. But it said unacceptable conditions have been inserted into the peace process and called on the international community to step in immediately. Right after this, the group walked away from the negotiation process and launched multi-front attacks on the bordering regions of Amhara and Afar on the same day. They recaptured the town of Kobo from Amhara region on their very launch day. As far as we know, the Ethiopian government hasn't inserted anything new that causes sudden jerk. TPLF started the shooting and crying at the same time as if they have been attacked by federal armies. Let's show you briefly what TPLF's 2 prominent preconditions for the peace talks are. The first one is the return of what it calls Western Tigray to Tigray regional state. The territory is known as Wolkate, which was part of the Gondar province before its inclusion into Tigray regional state after the coming of TPLF onto power. The group sees the Woolkate territory as a key strategic corridor bordering to Sudan. Gaining access to Sudan enables TPLF to use as a resupply route for weapons or recruits for further war and bloodshed and humanitarian abuse and destruction of the socio-economic infrastructure. Therefore, demanding Woolkate territory is viewed as a red line cross from the perspective of the government. The other precondition TPLF wanted to be fulfilled is the resumption of basic services such as telecommunication services, banking and electricity. But restarting of such basic services is not like switch button, as PM Press Secretary Beleni recently well said during her press briefing. Maintenance and replacement of damaged equipment and infrastructure must be properly undertaken. Above all, there is no remote operation, human beings are involved in the restoration works. No guarantee for the safety of workers. No guarantee either for the continuity of the services even after its restoration. As we learned from past incidents, it can be trashed any time again as long as the war-waging party changes its course of actions and war campaigns. Another very important thing we have come across recently is the disclosure of secret document of the TPLF's next strategy and its primary objective of continuing the war. According to the document, the African Union's negotiation is meaningless to the TPLF. They pretended to be taking part on the peace process simply to avoid the blaming if they would have refused it straight away. So this group is misleading the international community, but its major hidden agenda is regaining the power it lost 3 years ago by overthrowing the legitimate government. TPLF also acknowledges that there are external forces or countries who are supplying them with tangible weapons, the document revealed. They have also stated how they are using humanitarian aid and diverting for it their fighting purpose, and how they will be continuing to negotiate with aid organizations for this end. TPLF is confusing and deceiving the Tigray youth by claiming as if it is an inevitable and final victory. Despite all these hostilities and attacks from the TPLF, the central government has been adamant to peacefully resolve the conflict and close the war chapter as quickly as possible. Even before the initial inception of the Tigray War, the federal government had sent elders and religious leaders, including famous athlete and businessman Haile Gebrselassie, to Mekelle for mediation purpose. Unfortunately, the arrogant leaders of the terrorist organization refused to accept the hands stretched for peace. They humiliated the elders and the religious leaders and sent them back to Addis Ababa with no success. Consequently, TPLF launched what they call it as a lightning attack on the northern command of the Ethiopian National Defense Force based in Mekelle on November 3, 2020. The federal government forced to execute the law enforcement operations following the attacks. The group committed several atrocities in the neighboring Amhara and Afar regions, including the Micah Dera genocide. The fight calmed within the last 6 months after the government's humanitarian truce currently has renewed. The war-hungry TPLF is using forced recruitment and snatching children from their parents and putting them in the fire. Parents or spouses are put into imprisonment if civilians did not join up. Once again, the TPLF miscalculated and launched the war that it is miserably losing on all fronts. The areas held by TPLF fighters are surrounded on all sides, and the federal forces are marching towards Mekelle. Ethiopia's defense minister Dr. Abraham Bale, who is an ethnic Tigrayan, recently tweeted this. "When we capture children and youth, we find them drugged. They fight physically with our soldiers. When they are captured, they don't stop. When asked, they say they only drank tea." Briefing diplomats and representatives of international organizations about current developments in Ethiopia on Thursday, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mekonnen said that the federal government is committed to taking all the necessary steps to prevent TPLF from harming people in Amhara and Afar regions and meet its constitutional obligations and responsibilities, INA reported. In the face of the TPLF reignited war, the international community silenced itself from directly condemning war-renewed party. The Deputy Prime Minister urged all concerned bodies to do the same, as his government is taking what it takes to stop TPLF from harming Ethiopians. Unlike TPLF, which continues to impose conditions and disparage the AU-led peace process and escalates hostilities, Mekonnen stated that the Ethiopian government is committed to achieving peace. The government of Ethiopia has been taking measures against the terrorist group with utmost care to avoid civilian casualties, alerting them to protect themselves by staying away from military installations, he explained. The TPLF, which displaced people, killed civilians, looted and destroyed infrastructure, has returned again to attack the same neighboring localities in both Amhara and Afar regions. Despite the TPLF's victimhood tactics, including blaming and demonizing the government, the Ethiopian government will continue to uphold its constitutional obligations to safeguard the lives and livelihoods of all Ethiopians. These communities have lived side by side together with Tigrayans and intermingled with them throughout history, Deputy Prime Minister Mekonnen underscored. The TPLF, however, is trying to sow interethnic hatred and discord, culminating in bloodshed by expanding vicious attacks and spreading hate propaganda. The government is forced to take all the necessary measures to stop the TPLF from victimizing again these communities. Nothing will deter us from discharging our constitutional responsibilities of protecting the lives and livelihoods of all Ethiopians, wherever they may be, and from defending the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. Mekonnen thanked those countries which supported the federal government's attempts to stop further violence and questioned the motive of some groups that still provide support to the TPLF. Some entities persist with a negative view of this country, and very few have gone the extra miles of supporting the TPLF, while some promise to support them in open, Deputy PM added. The worst manifestation of hostility to the government has gone as far as supplying the TPLF with military hardware. The Ethiopian Air Force recently has successfully stopped one such attempt. This is a blatant violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ethiopia, Deputy Prime Minister underlined. Other countries must take notice of this dangerous development and understand that their national security could be willfully threatened at any time in a similar fashion, Mekonnen pointed out. Speaking on the humanitarian situation, he appreciated the fruits of the humanitarian truce in alleviating the dire conditions of people in Tigray, further urging some parties to desist from acting beyond recognized mandates. The Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister welcomed humanitarian partners and international organizations that honestly and impartially served the people. He also pointed out that certain groups should refrain from equating the legitimate government with the outlawed terrorist organization and from taking measures which will worsen the conflict and threaten Ethiopia's sovereignty. However, the Joe Biden's administration seems to be undermining and violating the federal government's strict statements against those parties who have been meddling in the northern Ethiopia's conflict. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa Mike Hammer has traveled to Ethiopia once again. He is said to be pressing for an immediate cessation of hostilities and the start of peace talks, according to the US State Department. In addition to meetings with Ethiopian government and African Union officials, Mr. Hammer was said to be meeting with civil society and political actors representing different regions of the country to discuss how best to promote efforts towards a lasting peace, security, and prosperity for all people in Ethiopia, the department's statement said. The United States is committed to the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ethiopia, it added. But these words are not consistent with the actions, according to our newsroom editor Billy. Billy says the US's actions are the other way round rather. Furthermore, the US echoed TPLF's claims that Eritrea has re-entered into the war. Mr. Hammer's visit at the midst of renewed war is nothing more than blaming the government. The Biden administration only heard to the cries of the terrorist group, not its shootings on the civilians. Instead of directly confronting the perpetrated TPLF, America has issued an en masse condemnation as usual. This brings to the end of our today's presentation. Thanks for staying with us. Don't forget to like, share, post your comments, and subscribe to our channel. Let's work with the algorithm of the YouTube. These are the ways you can support our channel to continue producing this and similar contents. May God bless Ethiopia and its people. Thanks again.